I'd like to talk about the creative process today, my relationship with it, my love for it, my recent epiphanies about the creative process, especially in this world of generative AI and chat GPT and the like. I fell in love with the creative process at 19. That would have been the year, 2003. 2003. In 2003, I had just finished my first year of college. It was summer. I was living at home, and I wrote a short screenplay. And for 3 days, I did not touch the ground. It was like being wrapped up in a tornado and this creative ecstasy that, oh, I live for it. And it was so, the experience was so tremendous that shortly thereafter, I completely quit video games. I remember sitting there playing a game thinking, man, I should not be playing this. There's so many things I want to write: novels, screenplays, short stories, articles, whatever. I had this burning inside of me. And so, yeah, I got rid of the video games. And for like the next decade, I wrote 6 to 7 novels. I wrote 13 screenplays, maybe more. I moved to Europe in my early 20s. I'm still here, actually. I turned down a big government job, and I moved here to focus on my writing, to continue to pursue that creative ecstasy that I had experienced in my room as a 19-year-old. So I was living in Europe, teaching in the evenings, writing all day, and I would write these novels, these scripts, and never really try to sell them. I would revise them and maybe share parts of them with friends for feedback, especially the screenplays. But I was always content just to save it somewhere on my hard drive and move on to the next project, because for me that sales process, or trying to get the piece out there, something wasn't clicking, and it wasn't part of the creative process in my mind. And I've got some thoughts about that now that we'll get into in a minute, but something changed along the way. I started having kids, and I realized this isn't going to pay the bills. So I found my way into the business world, where I quickly realized that all those skills I had developed writing the novels and the scripts translated very well into business. All that problem solving, the big picture thinking, the dot connecting, huge, right? I got shoehorned into the marketing sector, which was fine. It is what it is. I joined a startup working remotely from Europe with this startup in the US. I was very passionate about it at the time. I gave 5 years of my life to this startup. It's a very successful business today, but I was channeling all my creative energy into this for 5 years. And when it ended, it was like a train smacking into a wall. I didn't know what to do with myself after that. And yeah, I still had this burning need to be creative, but I was also burned out. And I worked with another startup for a couple of years, and then that ended. And for the past few years, I've been working to get my own consulting business up and running, consulting with strategic advisory. And it's been a struggle, frankly. I learned the hard way that you can't really sell strategy because it's so abstract, and I didn't want to do marketing anymore. But I realized recently that, one, the past few years, I was leaning way too much into chat GPT, using it as a thinking partner and just outsourcing stuff that I knew how to do, but I didn't want to be bothered with. And there's so much to say. We could do a whole series of videos just on chat GPT, but now people are getting really tired of chat GPT output, and there's become a renewed focus on the human element, whether it's in business or personally. People are hungry for that personal connection. What does this have to do with the creative process? Everything. Because I realized that when I was using ChatGPT as a thinking partner and using it to brainstorm ideas and whatever, I was essentially outsourcing a lot of the creative process. And the results were very unsatisfying personally and practically. Let me look at my notes. Hang on. I forgot. Let's see what. So the big epiphany, this is what really hit me recently. Why not build my own business if I'm so good at strategy, if I'm so good at marketing and connecting the dots? And I've had ideas. I've had an idea for a business for a while now. Will it work? I don't know. But it's I I had continuously shelved this business idea for a few years now because I thought that it wouldn't work and I got bills to pay, and so I was trying to do what everybody else was doing, basically trying to, when I say everybody else, I'm talking about solo consultants trying to get new business, right? Trying to attract clients, trying to convince people that to hire me to help them with their business. Why not just build my own thing, right? And there's a lot to be said about where I fell short in that process. And again, I was just building stuff and not really getting it out there because frankly, I feel really bored with the idea of hopping on social media, especially LinkedIn. Trying to find interesting conversations is very difficult nowadays. And I would get on there for 2 minutes and just be so bored. And so how am I supposed to build my business? How am I supposed to engage with people and attract people if I'm putting out posts and I'm only getting like 40 impressions? It's ridiculous. But what would happen if I built my own thing? And suddenly I feel my creative faculties returning to me. I've ditched my ADHD meds. I can feel my artist spirit reawakening. And I'd relegated that artist spirit to the shadows of my mind because I had told myself I had to focus on making a living, providing for my family. Those are sacred things, right? Providing for your family is very important. But so is entrepreneurship and authenticity. The world is changing so fast, and there's no time for self-doubt. There's no time just to mimic what others are doing, which, by the way, is not a very strategic move. If you've got a vision, you should definitely go for it, but be prepared to take your lumps along the way. The past few years for myself have been incredibly difficult, but I've learned the entire time. I've never stopped learning and transforming myself, building myself up. And now I'm at a point where I've got to really make myself vulnerable in getting stuff out there. All those scripts and novels I'd written, they're still collecting dust on my hard drive. But that doesn't mean that my artist spirit needs to be collecting dust, right? It doesn't mean that I can't keep moving forward and getting in front of an audience, whatever it is I want to build. And that's part of the creative process: learning, revising, and getting your stuff out there, making yourself vulnerable, opening yourself up to different types of feedback. If you just do what everybody else is doing, you might have a really hard time, because at the end of the day, is that integrity? Is it integrity if you're abandoning a part of who you really are? if I could go back in time and give myself advice, my younger self advice, it would be, well, I have to reveal something. I told you I quit video games when I was 19, right? I picked them up again in 2016, and I'm still playing them. And I think that has been, not that video games are wrong. I don't have anything against games, but I think that's where I've lost a lot of my creative mojo. That and burning myself out on client work. Uh, there, games are great. Like, if like anything, you can moderate them, but you're not exactly going to change the world playing video games. So where am I going with all this? I'm first of all, I'm not telling you what moves to make. But if you can find for yourself how to honor and explore the creative process in a way that resonates with you, in a way that gives you life, you've got to make it a priority. And if you do, you'll likely find a lot more satisfaction out of life. Now, we should probably talk about the actual creative process. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the process itself and why I love it so much. Let's take this video, for example. When I first started making notes for what I wanted to say about the creative process, I wrote a few lines and I thought to myself, man, maybe this is the wrong topic. How am I going to speak on the creative process for 10 to 15 minutes? But I just kept writing and thinking, and suddenly I had all sorts of things that I wanted to talk about regarding the creative process. And that's a big part of what it is. It's that starts with a vision, and then discovery, right? Discovering yourself. You're feeling your way in the dark, illuminating things along your path, connecting those dots, and creating something that, again, that gives you life, or could really give life to other people and help other people in ways that you can't even imagine. Now, if I had just, instead of figuring out this video on my own, if I had just instead plugged it into ChatGPT like I would have done even a few weeks ago, ChatGPT prompt on hey, give me some notes on the creative process, I want to do a video, the output would have been very generic, and it wouldn't have been very meaningful to me, and I wouldn't have been very excited about it. So if you're creating something that you're not excited about, how can you expect others to be interested, first of all? And second, I think that this process of going through and developing my notes on this video, figuring out what I wanted to say, is therapeutic. And personally, I'm moving more away from the Chat GPT, still using it for things here and there, but leaning on it much less, because I hate the idea of outsourcing the creative process. And by the way, if you're running a business and you're hiring people or outsourcing to people who are in turn outsourcing the creative process, which is very common right now with agency work, be careful, because you're going to miss a lot of those nuances in whatever you're paying for them to do. This is especially important in marketing work. And that's another video. I don't want to get too deep into that, but if I had used ChatGPT to make this video, to think about this video for me, right, I would have, the output, I think, would have been soulless, right? That's another important part about the creative process, is that within that tapestry, you have the challenges, the heartaches, and the terrible beauty of the world, all part of that very human experience. And just going all robotic and tech with it, there's something, I think, very dissatisfying about that. Because here's an area where all the theory in the world won't actually help you get started. ChatGPT could tell you everything you think you need to hear, but it's not going to get started for you. And it could give you the rules of the creative process. We could even Google it. You Google the creative process and you can find all the stages. And maybe that's helpful for some people, but it's like what writer Somerset Maugham said about the novel, that there are 3 rules for writing a novel, but unfortunately no one knows what they are. That's how I feel about the creative process and being an artist. And yeah, there's some training to it. I've been trained as a writer and a storyteller, but that was just foundational stuff, right? I've been cultivating my craft for decades, right? ChatGPT will never be able to write better than I can. But on those mornings where my brain is like foggy and I just don't feel like working, it's so easy to put stuff into ChatGPT. And it's been part of my process for a few years now. And I think there's been a point of diminishing returns. And another important factor here is to think about, ChatGPT aside, another important factor here is to think about all the different applications of the creative process, right? It's not just for painting or writing a book or whatever. You can use it for almost anything, whether it's whether it's problem solving, working on your relationship, or rearranging your room. It really comes down to problem solving, because what does creativity mean? To bring new ideas to old things, right? And it's the same thing when I'm writing a book. There's all sorts of problem solving that has to be done. And that's why I'm so good at problem solving in business. And it's really hard to turn that on myself and solve the problems of my own business, because I'm building it all by myself, and it's very difficult, and it's so tempting to use ChatGPT. But the other thing I want to say about the creative process is that it's important just to get started. It's not about perfection, and it's not about the end result. It's about the experience, the journey, the challenge, immersing yourself in whatever it is and coming out stronger and ready for your next dance with that process, whatever it may be. And to bring things around full circle, I think that in a lot of regards, the creative process is incomplete without some sort of audience. If you're creating things and you're not getting them out there for whatever reason, maybe it's self-doubt, maybe it's apathy, maybe you just don't know what to do to get it out there. Whatever it is that you're working on, whatever it is that you feel creative about. The thing is that if you're not getting yourself out there, one, you're missing out on the feedback loops to make yourself better, to make your work better, and two, you're depriving the world of whatever it is that you're creating. I'm not talking about creating some silly thing that nobody will care about, or trying to mimic what your favorite YouTubers are doing. No, I'm talking about you doing your own thing. And maybe you don't know what that is yet. Maybe you need to find it. And maybe you do know what it is. That's another video we could do, how to find your purpose. Very challenging. A lot of people struggle with that. But the thing is that the world needs creativity more than ever. The world is hurting. People are lonely, confused, scared, depressed. Creativity is such an amazing way out of that madness. It can be used as a problem solver, but it can also be used to transcend whatever's going on, right? If you're feeling miserable about the world, what happens if you start just writing short stories or painting? How do you think that would make you feel? What would happen if you turned your creativity on your relationship and started putting energy into that? Or let's say you're miserable with your job, so get creative about what else you could be doing. I'm not telling you to quit your job right now, by the way. I'm not telling you what moves to make. Please don't make any rash decisions here. Okay, but with so many people outsourcing their creativity to AI, I am personally observing a strong desire for human-driven creativity, and along with it, community and connection. And that's what art is all about. You've got to be able to tune out distractions to do it, though. Not easy, especially these days, but I'll tell you this, it's entirely more fulfilling than any video game you can imagine, social media, doom scrolling, whatever it is that's sucking up your time, binging on Netflix, whatever. The creative process is one of the most fulfilling things that I've ever experienced. And the times that I did get my art in front of an audience, for example, I wrote a short play in college. It was performed on stage in front of an audience. Wow. I was buzzing in my seat with electricity. It was the most amazing experience I'd ever had. Same thing when I worked on a documentary with a production team, and they hired me to come in and write the script for the thing. And, I came out to the film festival where it was screened, and that whole experience, one of the most fulfilling experiences in my professional life. Or that startup that I was a part of, right? When I flew out there and saw the headquarters that we'd moved into for the first time, and I was just in a state of creative ecstasy the entire time I was there. I helped build that. And unfortunately, the investors that came in didn't appreciate the fact that I helped build it, and they ended up firing the entire founding team except for the CEO. That's another story. But the other thing I want to mention is that just because you're not creating now, maybe you are creating, but if you're not creating now, it doesn't mean that you're not an artist. There are a lot of artists who don't create anything because they don't even think of themselves as artists, perhaps. They're just focused on providing for their families and usually working very unfulfilling jobs. And they're depressed and they hate their lives, and that's no way to live. I've spent much of my adult life trying to avoid getting a real job, working with freelance gigs here and there, and helping build businesses, and even working with nonprofits. I'm very passionate about that. But a full-time gig where I'm going into the office and helping build somebody else's vision every single day, I don't know. I guess I would go for if the right job came around, I would go for it. But so look, wherever you're at in your life, if you're feeling confused, depressed, angry, not sure where to put your attention, what moves to make, think about the creative process. Think about what projects are pulling at you that you've been putting off, right? What activities give you life? What again, providing for your family, that's sacred, but so is art and the creative process. And the creative process, our ability to be creative, to think creatively, This is what separates us from beasts and robots. In a word, creation. So if you're consistently outsourcing creativity to AI or ignoring creativity altogether, you're missing out. And I'm not sure how helpful any of this is, but if you have thoughts on the creative process or anything I've been talking about here, drop it in the comments. I would love to hear what people are thinking about all this, and where you're struggling with the creativity, the creative process, and if you love it just as much as I do, great. I hope that you're pursuing it, and I know that I need to start holding myself more accountable and focusing more on the creative process, giving my ideas time, effort, persistence, and getting them in front of an audience.